Hi there, my name is Tom Bell, and welcome to my 5 Minute Friday videocast on the 25th of July. I'm an author, I'm a consultant, I'm an educator, I'm a frustrated seeker of justice, I'm a former NHS whistleblower, and now I'm a full time PhD student. This Friday, I'd like to talk about public versus private. It's a kind of age old debate, isn't it? Sometimes a bit overworked, but public sector versus private sector. The reason I'd like to do that is I got something through from the local council a couple of weeks ago talking about how they've entered themselves into some award. And they say this is evidence of their drive to becoming more private sector like. You've got to laugh, haven't you? A local council saying it's got evidence of becoming more private sector like. And there are people within the public sector who genuinely believe that the private sector is bad, terrible, you know, and that they're great, somehow on a morally higher plane, that those rapacious people in the competitive private sector are horrendous employers, blah, 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 they'll do anything for a buck. And like everything, there are little seeds and shreds of truth that run through some of these things. The private sector is a very different place, I have to say. But even when we talk about the private sector, you can't talk about one thing because, in the UK alone, there are, I think, something like well over 1 million registered businesses, varying from self-employed, folks, as I used to be myself, right up to, organisations employing tens of thousands of people. So to label them all as one kind of private sector and to label them all with one attitude and one way of working seems like a bit of a nonsense, really. Well, it is a bit of a nonsense. However, what we can say about the public sector is that it's much easier to put a label across that. And I was talking to the chief exec of a private sector organisation a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the differences in responsiveness between public and private sector organisations. And he summed it up, I thought, rather brilliantly. He said, if you work in an organisation that cannot die, you become complacent. Now, have a think about that. If you look around at the public sector organisations on your doorstep, they might have been changed or consolidated in slightly different formats, but actually you've still got a local authority on the doorstep. You've got a policing service on the doorstep. Unfortunately, we've got utilities companies on our doorsteps, haven't we? And we still have healthcare services, of course, the biggest one of those being the NHS on our doorstep. And complacency is probably, I think, a really good lens through which to view those organisations. They are essentially complacent. And when I mean complacent, is they're complacent towards their service users, their customers, in the case of healthcare, patients, in the case of policing services, citizens, because they're not responsive to them. They all these organisations will roll out the red carpet for the regulators, for their commissioners, for their what they perceive as their funders. By the way, that's you and I, the funders, of course, but they forget that. But you never see them rolling out the red carpet for the service users. And if you do, it's a celebrated occasion, isn't it? It's, oh my goodness, how good are they? And the public sector's trying to say the public sector can be like the private. I mean, I don't want a public sector like the private sector, by the way. I don't want that. Actually, I don't want them to have to compete for services. I don't want duplicate health services. What I want is effective and efficient services, public services. And that doesn't entail competition. But I guess the question is, how do you, that thing called competition, that thing that we refer to, which experts will tell you competition drives innovation. Just look at Roger Bannister. Those of you that are old enough to remember that, when he broke the 4-minute mile record, he was involved in a competition. He didn't just go out and do it one morning. He had a pace setter, somebody to compete with, somebody to follow. He had people behind him, people pushing. You need that if you're going to get the best results. It's a fact, isn't it? We all go that bit further if we're competing with somebody. And I'm not suggesting competition needs to exist in every aspect of life. And I think the people that add the value at the front end of the public sector, I wouldn't want them to feel they were competing. The police officers, the nurses, the clinicians, social workers, people actually who add value. I guess it's those tiers up above them who create meaningless strategies and plans, who are saying that they're trying to become more like the private sector, but how can you become more like the private sector when you have no competition, when there are no threat of substitutes, when there are no threat of alternative suppliers, when you have a monopoly position in a marketplace? It's kind of crackers thinking, isn't it? So my question is, how do you get the public sector to be more responsive towards, and to how does it become more responsive towards the people who ultimately pay its bills? without having competition, without having the threat of competition? I don't know the answer to that, by the way, but what I would say is that there is there's a chasm between the two, between the responsiveness and the focus of the public and the private sectors. Every time I engage with a private sector organisation, I find that I'm not saying the private sector is brilliant, by the way. I'm a socialist at heart, or I believe in fairness. I think that's probably a better way of putting socialism, isn't it? So I'm a socialist at heart, or I believe in fairness, and I don't want to pull the public sector down, but you just can't help feeling that sometimes you're an inconvenience to it. You're not the focus of its efforts. The focus of its efforts seems to be the regulator and those people above it, and the MPs and the people with oversight. How do we get past that? Don't know the answer. How do you make public services more responsive? Don't know the answer to that. All ideas welcome. Thanks for watching, for listening, and have a good weekend. As ever, stay safe, stay solvent, and stay sane if you can. Ciao.